Good afternoon, and thank all of you for being here this afternoon to honor Paul, to honor his life, to share good memories of him, and just to celebrate who he was to each of us. I'm Chaplain Jeff Mayer. I work with hospice and with Mercy Hospital, and I was privileged to meet Paul a couple of times while he was at hospice. Please join me in prayer. My brothers and sisters, we believe that the ties of friendship and affection which knit us as one throughout our lives do not unravel with death. Confident that God always remembers the good that we have done and forgives our sins, let us pray, asking God to gather Paul to himself. Lord our God, the death of our brother Paul recalls our human condition and the brevity of our lives on earth. But for those who believe in your love, death does not end, nor does it destroy the bonds that you forge in our lives. We share the faith of your Son's disciples and the hope of the children of God. Bring the light of Christ's resurrection to this time of testing and pain as we pray for Paul and those who love him. We pray in Jesus' name. One of the Psalms that we say often in times of trouble, in times of grief, we find comfort in the words of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I lack. In green pastures he makes me to lie down. To still waters he leads me. He restores my soul. He guides me along right paths for the sake of his name. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You set a table before me in front of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. Indeed, my cup overflows. Goodness and mercy will pursue me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord for endless days. And then we read again in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden light. As I said, I didn't get introduced to Paul until very late in his life. Our conversations consisted lots of times on quite a few words from me and one or two words from Paul. He simply wasn't feeling that well. In those one or two words, though, I got a brief hint at his sense of humor. His friend Kurt, I think, was with him. At one point, he and I were talking, and Paul rolled over while we were talking and said, "What?" And Kurt said, "Well, we were just talking about God things." And he kind of got a glint in his eye and said, "Perhaps not." I know his road was not always easy. None of our roads are always easy. I do know that his road was filled with a lot of love. You can see it right here. All of you come to honor him. His yoke was not an easy one all the time. But this is one place where he found friends, where he found colleagues, and where he really enjoyed working and being. And that's something that's hard to do, is to learn simply to be who we are. And as I talk to you folks today and listen to your stories, he knew how to be, just to be, to enjoy life, to enjoy friends, and to share his love. When we find that, when we learn how to do that, as Jesus teaches us to do, then our yoke is easy, and the burdens we have become very light, because we get to share them with others very often, and that takes the burden off of us. I'd like to invite Connie to come up and say a few words.
Hi, my name is Connie Kunkel. I own and run Tri-State Rescue and Transport. I had started it 3 years ago, and I had a lot of good teachers that taught me to work in animal rescue and transport, and Jackie's definitely one of them. The first 2 years I had spent working down here with a lot of you guys and learning a lot. And that's how I came to know Paul. We learn a lot from Paul. We learned that windows were really winders. We learned that potatoes were really taters. We learned a whole new vocabulary from Paul. He, at the time, needed a change in his life, and from being a trucker, he thought transports would be fun, because all of you knew of his love for the animals here. And after he lost his wife, Tina, that was a big change in his life, and he definitely needed that change, so he come into transports. He was also getting weak even back then. He could still do little things here and stuff, but he still needed to feel whole and do what he could do. He made transports very interesting. I'm sure especially the volunteers know the Comdens that adopted Boomer and his brother. That particular transport was a blast. They were two totally different cats, even though they were siblings. Usually when Kurt drives and you're on the interstate, you don't see too much of anything because you're like flying low, especially when we would transport at night. So Kurt was driving and Paul was in second row seats with Boomer and his brother. And we knew then, a lot of times we could see what their personalities was going to be even on transports. And here's Boomer sitting on Paul's shoulder, you know, we're cruising 80 and Boomer's like, whee, this is fun. Where his little brother was like stuck to Paul's chest, you know, going, we're all going to die. And we go by this McDonald's sign, and Boomer does this complete turnaround on Paul's shoulder, watching the McDonald's sign lighted up at night going by. And Paul was telling us, he was saying, I want a fish sandwich and I want some milk. Which we all knew that we were not supposed to feed on transport. And we was constantly in touch with Mama Jackie here, because this is where they was coming. And when she found out Paul had fed Boomer fish and milk, she gave him the dickens. he definitely made transports interesting, especially a rat transport to Columbus. Yes, we did a rat transport. There are actually rat rescues in Columbus, Ohio. We were expecting the worst because, when our pickup point is in Indiana at a trailer court, we were all quite skeptical. But it was a brand new trailer, very beautiful, immaculate inside, and these rats were like your pet shop rats. The lady was a big animal activist, and she had bought them all from a pet shop down in Bowling Green to save them from being fed to the snakes, and then found these rat rescues in Columbus. So on a lot of our trips like that, this past summer, we would leave early and go fishing. We love to fish. And at one of our transports down to Columbus, we actually got to take him. He had always wanted to fish at Indian Lake, if anybody's familiar with Indian Lake down there. And once again, it proved to be interesting because at one point, Paul had one of his fish hooks stuck in his head from casting out. And I, at home, have all special needs animals, is what I specialize in. And it rang true that day on fishing because I caught a little 5-inch one-eyed bass, which I wanted to keep, but Kurt and Paul threw him back in the water. So Paul got weaker over the summer. There was less and less he was able to do. We finally stopped the transports to spend more time with him. A lot of doctor's appointments, a lot of surgeries. He had 7 kidney surgeries before they could even try and start the treatment. Then from the 7 kidney surgeries, it caused a umbilical hernia, which was another holdup on starting treatment. That took 6 to 8 weeks to heal. But throughout all the surgeries and all the delays, there was hope. And he kept that hope. He kept that hope until he took his last breath. And he was finally able to start the treatment. He was so happy. And he made it through that treatment for 6 weeks. He got so sick. So sick. And at the end of 6 weeks, his liver couldn't tolerate the treatment anymore. And 3 weeks later, here we are. But he was strong through it all. He was strong through all the surgeries. He was strong through all the appointments, all the hassle with his medications. One of his medications cost $2,000 each time. It was a lot of hard work and paperwork to get him that medication that he needed. A lot of people have asked why did he wait so long? He didn't really have a choice. His wife was sick first, and his first commitment was to his wife. And only one of them, being married, was allowed the Social Security disability and the Medicare. So he put his life on hold, his health problems on hold, for his wife, and I commend him for that. He did what he thought was right and what he had to do. Our last couple of weeks at the hospital was the first week there was still hope. He became unconscious one morning. I had found him, and he was unconscious for 3 days. The other 3 days down to UTMC, he was conscious. And again, he kept things interesting for all of us down there. He wasn't going to lose that hope. And a funny little story that happened down there, which a lot of you are aware of. And when Paul awoke and he was told what I had done, he laughed about it for the next week afterwards. I had went to the building behind UTMC to speak with his medical team. Now, remind you, I had been in that building at least a dozen times with Paul in the past year, went through those doors, but, you know, when something like this happens, we're all not thinking straight. I went in, I had the meeting with this medical team, and I come out, and the doors wouldn't open. Well, because of my height, I have problems sometimes setting off doors, and I just thought it was one of those doors that didn't recognize my height. And so I kept backing up and going forward, and it still wouldn't open. So I looked around me to make sure no one was watching, and I started jumping up and down, trying to open the doors. And they still wouldn't open. And the sweetest little voice behind me, I could hear giggle, and I turned around, and she was the most beautiful little colored lady in a wheelchair, and she was, you could see her laughing even from her tummy, and she says, "Can I tell you something?" And I was embarrassed that I had gotten caught, and I said, "I can't get these doors to open." And she says, "Honey, if you just let me tell you something." And I said, "Okay." And she says, "Honey, those aren't automatic doors. You have to push them open." When Paul awoke and everybody told him that story, he laughed for the next week. We had a couple other bloopers and blunders while we were down there, but we were still hopeful that week. We brought him home on a Saturday. He was home with us for 3 days. We had a good weekend with him. He felt confident. Monday morning, he asked me to bring him back to Defiance here to pay some of his bills, and he had been talking for a while about getting rid of Dodger. And he seen a car here in town that he liked, and so he wanted it. So we went ahead and got it. He got to drive it home that night. Was the only time he got to drive it was that Monday night. And yes, it really did go 105 miles an hour. And then Tuesday morning, Kurt and I seen him early Tuesday morning slipping away again, and he become unconscious again. So we were back down to UTMC with him for another 3 days. At 2 o'clock that morning, they said that they took his last readings of his liver panels. It was between 1 and 0. They said there was no way he would wake up. So all hope was lost. He stayed unconscious for those 3 days, and we transported him back here to Defiance. We figured it was where we all wanted him, was here at hospice. It was Jackie's idea, and I'm so glad that she recommended that. And he never woke up during transport, all during transport. And as they're putting him into his bed, he wakes up, and he looks at Jackie and I, and he says, "Did this dang thing happen again?" Well, he didn't say dang, but I'm going to use the word dang. And the next thing he said is, "Where is Kurt?" Because he always asked for Kurt. Even during an afternoon nap at home, if he woke up, he asked for Kurt. And then he wanted to know where his grilled cheese and ginger ale was. While Jackie and I are literally holding each other up from fainting dead away, the transporters are in shock. The nurses were in shock. He wasn't supposed to wake up, but he did. And he was awake all the rest of that week, those next 7 days. He would drift on and off, yes, but he was coherent and would wake up. And I think that was meant to be for him to tell everybody what he wanted to tell them, and to visit with all those that came and seen him. I'm really proud to have known him and worked with him and all of you, because animal rescue in the animal field, it's a brother and sisterhood like no other, and Paul was definitely a part of that here and for us all over the tri-state area. He stayed strong this summer, worked a lot of cases with tri-state, especially one really bad one in our county. But he stuck through it, and he got through the 90-day undercover investigation that we had to do. And every day he would ask, has this went to court yet? Because he wanted to see justice for those animals. And I was able to tell him 2 days before he passed that our case is very, very, very strong, and it will be going to court within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And I wish he could have been here to go with us to see justice done. So now we invite anybody else that would like to stand up and say a few words or tell how he touched your life in some way.
You know, Paul was a super special guy to all of us. And I've had a lot of people ask me when was the first time that I met Paul. And you know, I've thought and thought about it, but I can't really remember exactly the very first time that we met Paul. And I thought about it, and it seems like he's actually just been with our family here forever. And so my answer to that is that we've known him forever. He's been an important part of FFRC, my family, and to my mom and dad, too. He knew the volunteers very, very well. He loved the kitties and the cats, and he loved his cat so very much. When Paul's ashes were spread around on the property here, I made the comment to Connie and to Kurt that Paul has probably stepped on every square inch of this property here. He's been everywhere here, on both sides of the property, riverside, everywhere. Not only that, I do believe that Paul left a signature in every single room of the rescue center. He had his hands on many aspects of our rescue center's growing stages. I've walked through our rooms up there, and I see so much that he's done. He's put the walls in, he's put plumbing in, he's put the floor in. He's just done our first floor, our green floor. He's just has done so much for our rescue center. And this past week, I have so enjoyed listening to all the volunteers and the stories that they've told about Paul. And they've brought many smiles to all of us and many tears, lots of laughter. And I learned something, too, this past week or two, that he has a lot of special names for a lot of you volunteers that I never knew about. Pita is one of them for our Connie D. We'll let you figure out what Pita means. I just love Paul for what he did for my mom and dad. He took care of their property for 3 to 4 years, and their yard became his yard, and he took very, very good care of it. He never wanted anybody else to do anything out there. It was his yard. And even more important than that was the time that he spent with my mom and dad. In between doing different jobs, he would come in, and sometimes I would call him on the phone and say, "Where are you?" "Well, I'm sitting in here talking to your mom and dad." And that's what he did a lot of the times. Just go in and talk and talk and talk. And I don't know who enjoyed it more, my parents or Paul. Anything that my parents needed, Paul would do for them. One time he was there at just the right time. Mom probably remembers that, and prevented major flooding in the bathroom. Paul used to fish, too, on the lake surrounding their home. I remember one time pulling into the driveway just this last year, and there's Paul I thought he was mowing, and there's Paul with a garbage can in the front yard with a huge big fish in it, and a fishing pole in his hand, and his lunch there with him. And he was fishing and having lunch and enjoying himself. He caught a whopper of a bass that day. And of course, as Paul did most of the time, he put that fish back in the lake when he was done. There's certain things that needs to be done to my mom and dad's property there before winter. And the last week, I think he talked to Jimmy too. I think if not, I was supposed to pass it on to Jimmy, what the property needs at mom and dad's before winter comes. And he did that just recently. He just wanted to make sure that everything was okay for them. When my dad started declining in health, Paul would keep his phone right there by his pillow. And there were several nights that we had to call Paul and tell him that my dad had fallen again. And there were more times than not, he would beat me out there and help get my dad up. My brother-in-law, Dave, would meet us out there sometimes too, and my son-in-law, Eric. But Paul was there more than several times and got Dad up off of the floor. I remember a year and a half ago when my dad and I was hit by a car. Dad and I was coming home from the clinic, and some guy hit us. And it was so hot that day, and we couldn't run my truck. And I called Paul, and Paul came immediately. And the first thing he did was he wanted to get my dad in his truck to get him cooled down. So he always took care of my mom and dad, and he loved my grandkids, and he loved Jocelyn and Unique too. He would tease them something awful, and they knew that he loved them because of how he teased them. I remember one time, and this has been a few years ago, when a person was upset with us here at the rescue center and downright mad at us, and he broke the door down. I don't know if some of you volunteers remember that, the front door, when that was the front door office. This guy busted the door, and I wasn't home. That volunteer called me, and I called Paul, and he was here immediately. And before I could even get home, Paul had a new lock on that, and there was nobody going to bust that lock open again. He was right there for us. And there was another time that we had a major crisis here at the rescue center, and he was here when it happened, and there was no way that Paul was going to leave that day until peace was restored. He was really my hero that day. He saved us that day. I always told him that. And how many times did we see Paul walk around with kitties stuffed in his shirts? Lots of times. And do you remember the bonfires he would have here? Major bonfires. He liked those fires. And I remember when Tina was so sick, his wife, and she was so ill and didn't feel well, and he would bring her here just to have something to do with her, and he would always make sure that she had a chair to sit on, and both her and Paul would sit around and hold the kitties. And how many of us did he tease? The answer to that is probably all of us. He was such a lot of fun, and we all loved it as much as he did. I don't remember how many times I'd turn around and there he was giving me bunny ears. I remember a lot of times he was here when I would do boxes, and I didn't know he was behind me, and there I would turn around and he was there doing the bunny ear thing. And I remember the Greg and Paul shows on the webcam, all the teasing that would happen on that. They both sure could have a lot of fun on that. And up until the very end, Paul would still come in, and except the very last visit that he did here, Paul always still made time for his webcam friends. He would come in and sit and visit with them. I remember when there would be kids here and Paul would head out here to do his chores. If there were some kids here, he would take them out. Damien was one of them. He would take out here on the farm yard. There were some other kids that he would take out, and he would just take them out and let them hang with them. And Ray would come, his granddaughter, and he just loved showing them around. Paul loved all the animals, including the horses. He enjoyed riding and taking care of the horses here on the property. His saddle is here on the table right now, a symbol of that love. I remember one time I dared him to ride the donkey. He told me he couldn't. His legs would drag on the ground, so he didn't. But Paul loved his truck too. His truck and he were one and one. That was Dodger. Whenever he would drive in the parking lot, how many times would we hear it? Paul would, or somebody would shout out, "Paul is here." We always knew it because of that loud, loud truck. His mufflers are loud, his music was loud, and that's how he liked it. Steve and I just had to have his truck. It was a big part of him, and we love that. And if you go in the rescue center and look above the refrigerator there by the counter, you'll see dabs of white paint on the ceiling. One time I had asked him if he would cover up some of the bad painting that was up there. So I remember him standing on the steps because he was so tall, and he took the paintbrush and he dabbed. And I said, "Well, aren't you going to paint the whole ceiling there?" And he said, "Oh, he was going to get to it." And then the next day, it was still just dabs. There's a bunch of them still up there. And he said, no, he liked it that way, so it was going to stay that way. And it did. It's still there. Paul would come in the early morning, and he would work here all day. He spent his whole days here. But he always liked his afternoon nap. That guy could nap anywhere. I remember one time he was sitting in the welcome room office. You might have seen this picture on the Facebook. And he was sound asleep, and I walked up and I put the close sign in his arm and took a picture of him. Or he'd lay on the floor and play with the kitties, and he would doze off. And sometimes he'd have a half a dozen kitties sleeping around him. And sometimes the volunteers would have to sweep and mop, and they would sweep and mop right around him, and he didn't care. He would just keep on sleeping. The camper that's at the end of the property, we had that up here earlier. And he figured out a way to hook up AC to it. And sometimes when we couldn't find him, that's where Paul would be. He would take his afternoon nap in that. So I always get a kick out of that. He's had his footsteps everywhere, and he had his snores everywhere, too. Whenever anyone would need something up high, it was always, "Where's Tall Paul?" I think that's where that term came from, is we always called him our Tall Paul guy. There's so many memories, and there's so many of them, and they all bring us smiles. I remember he thought of this rescue center as mine, but he thought of this out here as his. This farmyard became his. This is where he felt at home. It became his in his heart. When Paul became ill and it was obvious that he wouldn't be able to continue to do the chores, he started to train Jimmy, and then Jimmy pitched in and got Anthony involved too. But that was really important to him, that he taught Jimmy how to do everything out here. And I always thank Paul for that, for looking out for us in the future. I would like to say a special thanks to Connie and to Kurt for taking such good care of him in the last days of his life. They opened up not their hearts, but also their home to him, and I'm eternally grateful for that. You guys will always be extra special to me for taking care of Paul. My last words with Paul was when I left his bedside on Wednesday night. I was there Thursday, of course, too, and Friday, but he was pretty much not able to hear us maybe then. I remember when I left, I kissed his forehead and told him I loved him, and he said he loved me too. And this man, he was loved by so many of us. Did you get the idea of what Paul was about? He was a big guy, always wanted everyone to think of him as a big toughie, but we knew his soft side. He had a major, big, soft side. He loved people. He loved life. He always offered his help to people. There's so many of you out here I know that he has helped. And he was so compassionate and kind. Our greatest gift that we can give back is to return all those wonderful qualities to others in his memory. I'd like to close with something that Paul wrote. When we were cleaning out his apartment last week, we ran across some poems that he wrote. He just thought he was so big and bad sometimes, but that heart of his gave him away. And we were going through those poems, and we flipped the last page, and there was one that was addressed to me. And I wanted to read this to you. It said, Jackie, family isn't always blood. It's the people in your life who want you in theirs. The ones who accept you for who you are. The ones who would do anything to see you smile and who care for you no matter what. And we are all Paul's friends, and I think he called all of us his family. Dawn, did you have something to say? My kids are all here, and I know they keep resurfacing, don't they? You talk loud.
Oh, no, I don't.
It's not a microphone. It's just.
Oh, okay. This was something else that they had found, and Mom keeps on saying that Paul was a big mush, and I have one of his CDs that he had made, and it is. He is a mush, even more than I knew. This was something that he had written. True love does not come from finding the perfect person, but from learning to love an imperfect person perfectly. Love is based on respect, compromise, care, and trust. And gosh, Paul, I think we all loved him. One of the things that I told Mom, Peggy here, Peggy back there. One of the things that I had told Mom and Peggy that I thought was, it was just a happy something with Paul. When I got my big red truck, he had told me I have to sit on a pillow to be able to see the hood, and Mom's discovered that driving Dodger. And so we were talking about that, and when I first started driving my big red truck out here, there were several times that Paul had to get me out of a fix and back me out a few times and pull me out forward a few times because I couldn't get out. I was used to driving in my little Jeep. And so he told me, Dawn, you've got to use your mirrors. You have to use your mirrors. And so and I can use my mirrors now. The other day I had to pull into work in a spot that I don't usually park in, and I just thought, well, Paul, I can use my mirrors now. He would be proud. So, yeah.
I know most of you have no clue who this strange woman is because I don't know you, but this strange woman's from the same bloodline as Paul. Paul and his brothers have always called me Aunt Sherry, even though I was their cousin, because of the fact that their father and I were so close. His father was more like my brother. And Paul got his characteristics from his father, trust me. His father was a tall man. He was a picker. That's something that runs in the family. If you walk into one of our family members' houses and you aren't being teased, they don't like you. Just that simple. And most times they'll tell you as such. But I've known Paul since he was born, and not only is he a big boy later in life, both the boys were big boys when they were born. They weighed 10 pounds and better at birth. So they never were little guys. They've always been big guys. And always had a big spirit and a wild personality. So the man you met's what He's always been, hasn't changed over the years.
Most of you guys are usually trying to shut me up. A couple years ago, Jackie called us. It was about a week before Thanksgiving. And Eric and his brother and sister was helping out at a youth dinner at the church where we lived, giving a Thanksgiving dinner. She wanted to help with the roof project. And I thought, sure, I was just wanting to pay Jackie back. Jackie always helped us with some flea medicine or some advice with some cats before. So that was the first time we came out here. And we were doing a roof job, and you guys say Paul acts like a tough guy. Well, we got to see it that day. And we thought he was going to throw one of the other volunteers off the roof. We just needed some popcorn, and it would have been a pretty good movie. And, I'm jealous of Paul. He's tall. Eric's getting tall, and he's looking at pictures, and we take pictures. It's, trying to do this all day. Well, you're going to be as tall as Paul. He had a big heart. Not one for money. I tell people I hate money, and I do. In my opinion, Paul is a rich man. He touched me and my family in a lot of ways. Told my daughter how beautiful her eyes were, and it offended her. Told her she had calf eyes. She thought it was a mean joke, but he was just trying to tell her how beautiful they were. And I don't know if I can do what Paul did, but I'm gonna do it like he showed me. And he's just a rich man. He had everything. I mean, he had family, friends, and I don't think he wanted for anything that really meant something to him.
I was out here working for Jackie one day, and I was trying to stay busy. Well, I kept seeing Paul fidgeting around up front, and he kept going in and out. Well, he finally comes out to me and goes, "Hey, Jackie wants you to go get hay with me." So I was like, okay. And we leave.
And Eric was supposed to be doing other stuff.
Yeah, I was supposed to be working back at near the river, raking leaves or something. And we leave, and we get there, and we picked up beef jerky and Arizona tea on the way there. And then he had me lift everything once we got there. He said he was driving, so that was what he was doing. Well, on about a halfway back, we get a call from Dad, because he's like, "What's his number?" And he answers it. And it's Dad, and Dad didn't know where I was. He thought I fell in the river or something. And I was like, "Well, Paul came out and told me Jackie wanted me to come do hay with him." And Jackie had no clue that I was coming along. I think she actually told Paul to go by himself. But I think he just wanted someone there with him to listen to music. We kept on fighting on what station it would go on, because I wasn't into country much, and he'd put it there, and then I'd put it on the rock. But it was a really fun trip between me and him.
We've been fortunate enough. We got a lot of Paul's music. A lot of it's stuff we listened to, and a lot of stuff Eric didn't listen to. But Paul had a love for a country rap, and it's a little different than what most people are used to. But I'm just really glad that Eric has appreciation for it.
Ball paint job.
Anyone else? Okay, at this time then, okay, all right. I'm sorry, didn't see you. And Connie back there too.
That's all right. This will be short. I had not planned on being here, but I had so many people online. I'm one of the chatters. I'm one of the people online. But I had so many asking me to come and to try to represent them and to say a few words. I suppose what I want to say is that Paul meant so much to all of the chatters out there, because he would spend a lot of time in front of the camera talking to them and taking care of the cats and petting them and everything, and they all came to know him. And he would joke around with them and have a good time. But the Paul, the rough guy that everybody thinks of, we saw an entirely different picture of him. You know, here was the guy who would walk into the room, and those who didn't know him would say, "Who's that big guy?" And of course, others would introduce him. That's Tall Paul. And the next thing you know, here was this giant of a man picking up a tiny kitten, putting it up on his shoulder or in his pocket or down his shirt or somewhere, and talking to it. And you would expect this big booming bass voice to come out, and he had this gentle tenor of a voice, and he would talk to the cat so gently, and he would pet it, rub it under the chin, maybe even feed it. And I think the memory that I will always take with me of Paul was seeing those large, work-worn hands, gnarled, calloused, and yet so gentle that he could pick up a 2-ounce and pet. And I knew that this place was his heaven, and I'm so glad that he will be here forever, Jackie.
I'll come back a month or so when they're gone, and I'll finish the job. And that tree is down, and it did take a month or two. And the first thing you checked was those baby birds were gone. That's Paul. anybody that's Paul. And then to admit it to me, yeah, I can. I was up at hospice a few times. Okay, got it. This is the other side of Paul. No pun intended here. On the day that he amazingly woke from the coma that he wasn't supposed to wake up from, I was volunteering that day, but I went to visit that evening and went in, and he said, well, whichever, I'll skip over all that part. And then he just said, I think I'm going to go down to the nurse's station. I have a Charlie horse. And I and Kurt were sitting in his room, and he gets up and he just walks. And he walks out of the room, which is at the end of the hall, by the way. He's just at the end of the hall. I kind of look at Kurt, and Kurt looks at me, and I said, is he supposed to be walking? And we both knew he wasn't even supposed to be awake. So we go out to follow him, and there's a wheelchair there, and so I'm taking the wheelchair, smart me, and we're following him in case he needed it. And he's walking, turns around and says, what are you going to do with that? And we won't share what my response to that was, but it was said in humor. And he just said, and kept walking, and he made it all the way to that nurse's station. And Connie was down there talking. He's leaning back at me, and he said, told you I didn't need a wheelchair. And proceeded to just move. I really wanted to just, I thought then he would realize how sick he really was. So yeah, that was, gosh, maybe a week later. But yeah, I got my first move from Paul. And laughter till the end. Good-hearted man. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. And Katie.
Well, I was just informed that we're not supposed to. We're supposed to talk loud. So you got my big mouth, so you should be all good to go. Jackie gave this to me to read, but before I do, I want to tell you what Paul meant to me. Sorry. Okay. The first time I met Paul out here, scared me to death. He was so big, and his language was way out of whack. And I was up at the rescue center, and I heard some shooting going on back there. And I know that was the time we had foxes out here that was kind of eating our chickens. So I just stood up there, and I waited, and he come lumbering up like he does. And I thought, you know what? He's either going to shoot me or he's going to be my friend. So he come walking up there and looked at me, and I said, well, Marshal Dillon, did you get your man? He said, well, Granny Scarpelli, I did. And that was my name from then on, was Granny Scarpelli. And Jackie was talking about him sleeping in the camper. Well, one day I was out here, and it was like 100 and some degrees, and he come up missing. So I come out here, and I was looking around, couldn't find him. I went everywhere, couldn't find him. So his truck was sitting over there. Walked over there, and here he's. And I thought maybe he had had a heart attack or something, so I went over and I said, Paul. Nothing. I said, Paul. And I kept hollering at him and hollering at him. Pretty soon he goes. I said, you know that you just scared the bejeebers out of me. I thought you'd had a heart attack. no, I'm taking a nap. So we don't mess with him taking a nap. When he found out that I was using the ladder to crawl up into my attic, he said that's not going to happen anymore. He told me what kind of ladder to buy, and he come over, and him and I put the ladder up, the one that folds down, so I could go up the steps into my attic. He gave me the drill and the screws to go up in the attic and screw in the frame while he stood at the bottom. When I went up in the attic, he shut me in. That's just a sample of what we used to do to each other, and I love the man like a son, and I will miss him. He was a good man.
Is there anybody else that'd like to share anything? Oh, this what Peggy's going to read is we found poems and things that Paul had written.
Yeah.
That's what Dawn read and Connie, and this is what Paul had also read.
I think he was an old toughie. I mean, well, I know 95% of you know that he wasn't. He was a big softy. But I was amazed when she showed me some of the stuff that he had written. He was very educated. Even though he might not have graduated or whatever, he was a very educated man and a very good-hearted man. And it says, when someone comes into your life, God sent them for a reason, either to learn from them or to be with them until the end. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. And we all know that he's better off than any of us sitting here today.
Thank you, Peggy. Okay. Is there anybody else that would like to say anything? Which story?
Oh. One day, Jack and I had to go to up north to Montpelier, and I don't live in Defiance, we live southwest of here, so we take a shortcut for us and come down. The local people know it's called the Bend Road. And we're motoring down the Bend Road, and we get up just north of the Paulding County line, and I said to Jack, oh my God, I said, pull over. He said, why? I said, well, pull over. I said, that truck. He said, what's wrong with it? He said, what about it? I said, that's Paul. And his Dodger was pulled over the side of the road, covered with mud. You couldn't even tell what color the truck was. And Paul was hunched over the steering wheel, and I said to Jack, something's happened to him. And so he pulled over, and he thought I was crazy. And I jumped out of the car, and I walked back there, and I looked at Paul. Paul looked at me, and he said, what are you doing here? I said, what are you doing here? I said, I thought something happened to you. He said, no. He said, I'm trying to make a cell phone call. I said, what did you do to your truck? He said, oh, he said, my in-laws have a farm down here a half a mile. He said, I was mudding. I said, 16-year-olds mud. I said, not people your age. He said, yeah, but it's a lot of fun. He said, he was just as happy as he could be. And another time when I was parked over here where this gray car is parked behind Kitty Castle, he had a ladder up there. He's working on the roof. And Ruth and I parked back there on Monday afternoon, so we'll be out of the way. And he came running in the rescue center, and he said, hey, he said, Jackie, he said, is that your Buick back there? I said, yeah, why? He said, God, I hate to tell you this. He said, I knocked that ladder over by mistake. And he said, it fell right on top of your car. I said, oh, you didn't? He said, yeah, I did. And he had me so convinced. I walked all the way back here. There was no ladder. He didn't. We teased each other all the time. He was a super person.
Kurt, would you bring Jasmine up here, please? been with us for almost 2 years now. She is known as our crack house dog. She was a legal pull from a crack house down in Van Wert, Ohio. She was so starved in malnutrition, when I got her up here to Fountain City, she weighed in at 27 pounds. She had lost the use of her back end because of the malnutrition. It took a lot of physical and hydrotherapy and a lot of love to get Jasmine back going. These are the type of things that Paul worked with Tri-State with us with, was working with Jasmine. A lot of times in drug houses, they don't want these dogs to bark. They will pour acid down their throats so they can't bark or alert nobody. Jasmine didn't bark. We scoped her. Her throat was fine, but for whatever reason, she was taught not to bark. After working with Jasmine for a year, it was a glorious moment for Paul. He finally got her to bark. This is the type of work he did with Tri-State in a lot of our bad cases. And today she's happy and healthy at 80-plus pounds and can use her back legs because of people like Paul. And
Are we all set?
You want to see where are we going from here? Oh, you're going to release the dogs then?
Oh, yeah. You all know Paul loved all animals. He loved all the animals, and I think that's partly of why he loved it here. And he also liked peace. So we have our eight birds here. They represent 8 doves of peace, although they're homing pigeons. But we wanted to release them today in honor of Paul. And hopefully Big Al is not around. Travel. A journey. So they'll call us later today and let us know when they all arrive home safely. See, that one looks like it's probably going in the right direction. I know. It's amazing. Yeah, where they go, where their home is.
Yeah. How they know.
How do they know? God gave him a good insight.
Is that how they used to do mail?
While we're ending, let's just pray together as Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. And we just have one prayer before we close. I'm told that Paul was fond of American spirituality, so I give you this one thought to keep. I am with you still. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond's glint on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the sweet, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft starts that shine at night. Do not think of me as gone. I am with you still, each new dawn. Again, thank you all for being here to honor Paul. Share memories and enjoy some